On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about the importance of mobility work or mobilization, warming up, what you want to call it, basically getting yourself primed for movement, the important things to do, and what I've found has really helped myself and clients really prevent injury and have successful training sessions as well, and ultimately get stronger. So I hope you enjoy this episode, guys. Welcome to the Breakthrough the Bullshit podcast. I am your host, Alice Round. I am pumped to have you here. We are going to really strip back all of the bullshit surrounding nutrition, training, fad diets, everything in the industry, so that we can give you education to get the best possible results. So sit back, enjoy the ride, and let's go through all this bullshit. Welcome back to another episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. And today we are talking more from a training point of view. I feel like we've been doing a lot of nutritional and mindset videos, but let's get back to some training topics. And I have been having a little bit of a think about seminars, camps, all this sort of stuff. And I will definitely be running something again. I am looking at dates at the end of June. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And I'll be releasing some stuff soon. But we're going to be looking at doing a camp on basically more hypertrophy training and muscle activation, and really getting to people to understand why certain body parts might be lagging, why they're getting certain injuries or instabilities, imbalances, all of this, and really learn how to transform your body through that as a result of improving your technique overall and choosing the right exercises for your body type and goals. So that'll be cool. That's something coming up. So if you do want to kind of pre-reserve a spot or get more info on that, be sure to shoot me an email to info@aliceround.com and just kind of put hypertrophy camp in the headline of the email so we know what it's regarding, and you can be top of the list because there will only probably be about, I would say, 12 spaces available for that. I don't really like doing groups any bigger than that for camps. So getting back to today's episode, and definitely something that will tie in with that, is mobility work. And mobility is a very general term that I'm using. And if we actually think about mobility work and what it means for you, the actual term mobilization, it basically means the action of making something movable or capable of movement. That's the actual dictionary meaning of mobilization. So if you're doing mobility work, you're making something more movable or more capable of a specific movement, meaning that you're kind of priming that for the exercise that you're performing. And a lot of the time people skimp on mobility work. This happens very, very regularly. And I almost think that if you're going to strength train and you want to go heavy, let's say, for example, you're going to go in and do a heavy squat session and you skimp on your mobility work, you're almost skimping on the potential to get yourself better results. Also skimp on, reducing injury risk. There are so many things, and a lot of the time, if you have not performed mobility work, certain things can happen. All right, so basically the top three that I see with clients, myself, whatever it is, when you don't perform adequate mobility work is, number one, you have definitely a higher chance of injury risk. You definitely will often be more sore throughout certain movement patterns in different body parts that you're not supposed to be sore in. You'll find that maybe your motor firing patterns are slightly different because there'll be certain tightnesses that are kind of inhibiting your range of motion. That is a very, very big one. And the other one is often that your strength is a little bit less, or it takes you more sets to kind of actually get yourself into a good place. And then sometimes that can mean a bit more fatigue as well. And that's a very big one too. Now, the other big thing that I see people, not so much, I won't say do wrong, but things that I probably don't agree with and don't recommend to my clients when they warm up. The biggest things that I see, all right, number one, people just walking into the gym literally cold and starting getting under a bar and squatting. So we're going to use squats, for example, here. That is a massive one. I don't really understand it. Your warm-up set, so let's say, for example, you're squatting the bar, then you're putting weight on, you're increasing your weights, you're progressing through. They are not really, it's not really your actual mobility work. That's your warm-up sets. It's not your mobility work. They're a completely different thing. Generally speaking, you won't just get straight under a bar and start squatting. It's not what is optimal, and you will have a higher chance of potentially doing some damage. The other big thing I see is people coming in and doing a heap of cardio before they train, and they'll pretty much like run for 10, 20 minutes and then go jump straight under the bar and start squatting. Now again, cardio, I do like a little bit of cardio as part of the warm-up mobilization sequencing, but I would call that more of a warm-up, and then your mobility work, and then your warm-up sets, and then you perform the movement pattern. That's kind of the sequence that I like to encourage. I think that in winter, if you live in a cool climate, you train in a cold gym, I think it's really good to do maybe 5 or 10 minutes of cardio just to more get your heart rate up, your blood flowing, make your joints a little bit more mobile, feel better generally speaking. And I have nothing against that, but the point of that warm-up is to not fatigue you. It's to start to warm your body and your core temperature up. So you want to be working at, no more than kind of like 60-70% of kind of your maximal output when you are doing that for an extended period of time. You may throw in like a few little quicker sprints in there or a faster interval, but you kind of don't want to be working in a long state that's actually going to fatigue and start to, use muscle glycogen up. We want to store that for your heavy sets. So in terms of that, they're the two big things that I see. The other big one that I see is a lot of people doing massive amounts of static stretching before they train. And if you're not sure what a static and a dynamic movement is, a static stretch is a stretch where you're holding it for an extended period of time, generally anywhere from 15 to 45 seconds. And that can often cause a bit of muscle relaxation and overstretch as well when you're actually performing the movement pattern. So it's not ideal to statically stretch a muscle for too long before you go and train. Definitely after has some massive benefit in terms of recovery, but generally pre-training, you want to keep those static movements quite short. You want to, again, probably not use your prime movers in that as well, and generally more do mobility exercises that are more functional, more dynamic. So a dynamic warm-up is more something that is movement based, is going through a range of motion, and is generally something that is more functional to the exercise you're going to be performing. So if we're going to squat, that means I'm probably not going to do a functional warm-up where I am, let's say for example, I'm trying to think of something where you're not really that functional. Probably something where you're rotating through your lower back, because when we squat, we're trying to keep the trunk quite straight up and down. We're trying to keep that clear bar path. We don't want to actually have any rotation side to side. So we would want to keep those movements in that same plane of when you're squatting. So for example, you want to always think about also where you are most tight when you perform that movement. So with a squat, for example, a lot of people are tight through their ankles, their hip flexors, and then also often their shoulders and pecs when they're holding the bar, especially in a low bar position. So I generally make sure that I warm up those 3 areas and mobilize those areas before I ever get under a squat rack. So that might be, for example, some knee to wall ankle mobility. It might be a walking ankling drill. That might be some walking bodyweight lunges, opening up the hips, a nice long lunging stretch, which is also functional to the squat. It might be some bodyweight goblet squats or a light dumbbell, really sitting down and driving the knees out. They are kind of some of my favorites for warming up for squats. And then getting that bar in the low bar position, I generally really like doing like an overhead broomstick squat. So really pushing that range of motion, some shoulder rolls with the broomstick, pulling back into that low bar position of where you'd hold the bar and feeling that slight stretch through the pecs and shoulders. So these are all the things we're kind of going through the range of motion of the movement without load to see how the body's feeling. See, is it primed for that movement pattern, and what things maybe are a bit tight that we might need to work on in the future, work on post-workout. All of these things are really important. And then obviously once you've spent that kind of 5-10 minutes of that light cardio, that 5-10, I would say at least 10-15 minutes of the mobility exercises, then you're then going to begin your warm-up sets. So you're really probably not going to get under a heavy bar for at least the first 15-20 minutes you're in a gym. And I think that we're also busy in our general day-to-day life, and a lot of people just rush through the warm-up process and not focus on it. And I do think that it's important. And again, it depends on what style of training you're doing. If you're doing powerlifting or Olympic lifting or even CrossFit, where you're doing a sport where there is heavy load, you're pushing almost to fatigue on some of your lifts, and you're going at higher intensities, your warm-up is more important, in my opinion, than say someone who is going in and doing more of a full body training program. You're not pushing to high intensities, you're working more on hypertrophy. Again, it's still very important. I'm definitely not saying that, but I'm saying you may not need to spend quite as long warming up for that day of training. Again, I would be making sure that, say you're doing a full body workout, for example, that you're picking a couple of mobility drills that warm up different body parts. So warm up your upper and your lower body, as well as obviously your core temperature, and going through some ranges of motion. So I always find with mobility work and dynamic warm-ups, there's two things that I kind of factor in when I'm choosing the exercises that I'm going to be performing. Number one is where I'm tight specifically. So for me, it tends to be hip flexors, not too bad in my upper body. It's generally hips and quads, a little bit of ankles. And for someone else, that might be completely different. So I'll tend to base it on where I'm tight, as well as obviously the actual body parts that are going to be exercised that day will be the second reason for choosing exercises. Like if I'm training all upper body, just because my ankles are tight doesn't mean I need to mobilize my ankles on that day. So think about what you're doing on the day, as well as where your tightnesses lie and how that can improve your lift. And I think that mobility work and good warm-ups has such a big impact on what you're doing. If you're tight in a certain area, you won't be able to activate a muscle as well more often than not. So a really good example of that is a lot of people get severe upper trap tightness, upper trap injuries. They have issues there where their traps are always firing. And a lot of the time, these people have this problem, and I'm not saying all the time because everyone's different, but one of the big reasons why you can have this problem is that there might be a lot of pec and shoulder tightness, which is causing you issues with actually activating the right back muscles when you're training back. And what's going to happen if your pecs are short and tight, your shoulders are going to roll forward. When you train, you're going to struggle to pull them back. And then your upper traps are going to be more dominant in a forward position of the shoulder. And it's going to, any sort of front delt is going to be more activated, and also upper traps. Whereas if your shoulders are pulled down and back, everything's retracted, your scapula's back and down, you're going to be able to activate your rhomboids, your scap, your lats, all of these things, obviously not your scapula, but your lats attached whilst you're doing this movement. So a lot of the time, mobility works affects more things than what we are kind of aware of or pay attention to. The other big one is obviously activation and technique, but mobility work plays a huge role. So be sure that when you are picking your exercises that you're focusing on where you're tight, and then going from there. And any good program and any good coaching system will have some kind of warm-ups that are given, pre-training exercises, all of this sort of thing factored in to assure that you're not just going in cold and potentially injuring yourself. So be sure that you understand your body, what it requires, and do the appropriate mobility work for your training. And I know everyone hates mobility work. Some people love it. Most people hate mobility work. I hate mobility work. It's boring. But I see it as a reward for my training. So I know that if I don't mobilize, I don't deserve to squat heavy because I haven't put in the groundwork. And that's the way you kind of want to see it. Look at your warm-ups and your exercises as kind of priming you for that movement. And also as a bit of a reward. Okay, I need to do my mobility work so that I can do X, Y, and Z. And again, like I said, depending on what sport you're playing, what you're doing, it's going to take a big difference. But I know, for example, when I used to sprint and run, we would spend like a solid 40-45 minutes warming up before we actually did any sprints. And it was so boring. I just wanted to get into my session. But I knew that if I didn't do that groundwork, I wouldn't have as efficient range of motion when I ran. I wouldn't have as good muscle activation. I wouldn't have as much speed and power. I would have a higher chance of like tearing a hammy or an injury risk. And athletes tend to respect it more than the average gym goer. And I don't believe that we should be approaching it in any different sense. Weight training is dangerous and it has a high injury risk. So it's really important that you see yourself more as an athlete and factor in the importance of a warm-up if you are choosing to basically do a sport and train. You know, have respect for that and go in there and be sure that you focus on that when you are training. So that is kind of it for now. I'm keeping it short on this podcast. I'm going to try to keep them short unless I've got a guest on, pump them out consistently. And yeah, that's it, guys. I hope you have an awesome day. And if you factor in any of these exercises, be sure to let me know. On my membership site, we do have a lot of mobility exercises on there as well. And that's part of the content that gets updated weekly. So you can check that out at aliceround.com, and that's the membership site. And other than that, guys, and send through an email with any questions or topics you want to have on the podcast. I'll be more than happy to answer. And I'm also going live on my Facebook page for a fair few days, and I'll try to keep that up. So be sure to jump on that. There's a lot of content flying around, keeping myself busy. It is hard to keep up, but we're getting it done, staying positive, and I will chat to you legends soon. See ya. Thank you for listening to another episode of Break Through the Bullshit. If you enjoyed this podcast, I would love it if you could leave a review on iTunes. Let me know, comment what you'd love to see more of, and be sure you've also subscribed on YouTube and iTunes for updates. And if you'd like more info, then you can also add the Team Round Support Facebook page, which is available to access for all of you, and you just simply need to search for it on Facebook.